Hey, this is Glenn. Welcome to another episode of Difficult Questions. This one, is feminism dying? So I was listening to a podcast and there was a young woman on there and she was saying how she was trading sexual favors for Uber rides. And I just thought, wow. And she's saying this on a podcast, kind of with pride. And it struck me. So I started thinking back to what feminism was and what the idea of feminism was when I was growing up. And I grew up with very strong directed women in my life, my mother and my aunts. And so being a high school kid of the 90s, early 90s, I was really swept up into like that 90s feminism, which was very kind of women can do everything, women can do it all, very masculine, tank girl kind of thing. Terminator 2, that very kind of gung-ho woman. And I thought, all right, I'm into that. That's fine. And at the same time, I was really driven in a very, I guess, masculine way, but not towards women, because I always wanted to respect women, my mother and my aunts. So I knew that I was a good fifth wheel with some friends. And so I always knew that men sucked and I never wanted to be like them. And then I thought, okay, this idea of feminism is equality. And so you just want men to be equal with women. So I'm going to say exactly what I mean. And there's no confusion and I'm never going to be a jerk. And I'm never going to date because that just seems gross and disrespectful towards women to try to say, hey, might there be something romantic here? I always had girlfriends that were friends. And I had this idea of what feminism was, and men always sucked. And, women can do anything in the work world. And I should be a proponent of that. And I was a stage technician, and then I ended up getting into academia. And stage technician is a very male dominated career. So I thought, all right, well, I'm going to train whoever wants to do this and not kind of make it uncomfortable for women to do it if they want to do it. And sure enough, I trained a lot of students and was just thinking, all right, I'm doing my part. But invariably, you think about what people want in life. And men, it's very, at least for me, it was very service oriented. Men, you have to do something, you have to serve, and you put your needs on the back burner. Or if you need something, you are less than a man, or you take it if you need it. Very masculine. So I just thought everyone needed to do that. And I saw in the work world, women were wanting protections from men doing men things. And, I had been harassed as a young man at work. And I just thought, why? I just have to protect myself. And I couldn't figure out how these protections would work at work. And the women that I was training to be stage technicians, well, a lot of them got married and had babies and they weren't stage technicians. So I just thought, oh, all of my work is for naught. I was training a new generation of masculine women. And no, it's not. They left. They got out of university and said, I don't want to do this work. And they found something else. And a lot of them had babies and raised babies and became mothers and did that feminine thing. Before I became a teacher, I worked at Harrah's Casino, and there was one woman stage technician on the crew. And she was adamant that she was going to be the only woman on the crew because in her past, they had had another woman on the crew, and that woman would use her sexuality for manipulation. And what that did is it subverted any kind of headway this other stage technician had made being one of the guys and trying to succeed in a male dominated world without using her sexuality as manipulation. And for me, I recognized sexuality for men was a weakness. So I always tried to shy away from that. And then as I was going through my life and really kind of reflecting on what I had built, and I was married at one point, and, you know, my dad had always said, well, your mom cooks dinner because I do yard work. And early on, she was complaining that I didn't cook. And I said, okay, well, you help me do the yard work. So when I got married, I cooked and I cleaned and I did the yard work. And then I expected my wife to do the yard work. We're equal. And she didn't like that. So there was constant kind of friction like that. Or she would kind of make suggestions and I'd say, wait, are you saying this? And I'd want very explicit direction, which was very annoying to her. She didn't want to give explicit direction. She wanted me to just know or guess or pick up on clues. And I said, no, this is the way I communicate. So that life of being married didn't work out for me. And then I started scaling my life down and I realized what I wanted to do. And I've always been very directed about my creative projects. This is what I get joy at. I don't need a family. I don't need companionship from a woman. It's nice, kind of, but that's not really my priority. And then I started being able to, you take all these risks doing these creative projects. So you have to really scale down how much you have in life because you can't afford much if things don't hit. And I realized I wasn't sexy because I didn't have anything. And I always called myself stupidly independent. And with guy friends, I rode a motorcycle with only one seat. I didn't give rides. I would meet you places. I didn't have a car. I didn't want a car. Cars are too big, extra expense, didn't need that. But now when I'm dating, what I found is if the woman is driving me around, at some point she feels that that's not cool. Whether she says it or not, it's kind of not cool. And if I don't have a cool apartment, a hangout that's big enough for her to be around, and if we're not going to restaurants, which I don't go to restaurants anymore because it's kind of a waste of money, and that's not cool. Women want to be entertained by their men, I think, and want to be led to a certain extent. Because for me, it would always just, even after my marriage, if I'd fall into some kind of relationships, they would eventually not be happy with me because I don't have much. I just keep it small and it's not very fun for anybody else. And I also didn't enjoy the emotional roller coaster. I like emotional stability, and I didn't get any joy from the emotions that women brought to a relationship. So I'm just at this point where I think, okay, the idea of feminism equal is not working because men and women are different. Women in the work world want men to stop being men, but that's never going to work because that's like us asking women to not be women. It just doesn't happen. So this idea of feminism of equal and the rise of women being able to make a lot of money using their sexuality and men wanting to pay for that and not having to touch men, this video streaming, the OnlyFans stuff, and women saying, no, I want to be a woman and successful. Whereas men are saying, well, I want to be a man and successful, and I don't necessarily want to get married because it doesn't benefit me. And I see on social media all of this kind of animosity towards each other, which I've always seen. It's this frustration of this butting heads of what you want in life. Do I want kids? Do I want my wife to take care of the kids? Are we both going to have a career that we upkeep and then pay someone else to raise our children like rich people? Like what do we want out of life? How often do we spend life together? The other thing that when I was married, the thing that really grated on my ex was I had this idea that we could coexist two different lives together instead of melding into one life. And she very much wanted it to be one life. She wanted it to be the life that she wanted to lead. So she wanted me to do what she wanted to do, which I fought, which she didn't like. So it was not going to work out. I just think, is the idea of feminism outdated? Or is it a failed experiment? I recently listened to Islamic leader, and he was saying men have a men's world and women have a women's world. And I know that in some kind of faith-based rubric, that can mean that women are subservient to men. But in a Western philosophy, are we getting to a point where we're going to coexist and it is different, but there's always going to be tension? I don't know. When the Me Too movement happened, there was this idea that you can't approach women because if you do, there's no forgiveness. If it's not wanted, you're in jeopardy. So men just started turning off. And then women, from what I hear, I wasn't in the work world when this happened, but from what I hear, women have been asking, where did the men go? Why are they not approaching us? Well, that's why. There's no forgiveness. If you get an advance and you don't want that advance, then that man is in jeopardy. And also, if you're at work, well, then there's this other idea of you're not supposed to have romantic relationships at work, except we know that people are people and a lot of romantic relationships happen at work. So what are we doing? I don't know. What are your thoughts? Is feminism dying? Is the idea of feminism dying? Is it changing? Should it just be respect for each other and then kind of challenge how we respect each other and the ways we disrespect each other? Because I see that we're disrespecting each other a lot. I don't know. What are your thoughts? Thanks.